It's early. Too early. You know, earlier enough your mind still wants to believe it's night. Thoughts of returning to the sanctuary of my warm bed cloud as my mind as I continue to drive. I've never been this early, I thought, flipping on the cab light and glancing down at the train schedule. 4:24. That'll put me at school with 4 hours to spare. I thought to myself as I smiled, realizing I may be in fact be able to pull off this term paper after all, which I had so carelessly neglected in the previous weeks. As I pulled up to the dreary, faintly lit station, I immediately noted how peculiar it looked. I'd been coming to this train station for the better part of 3 years, and yet something seemed, off. I brushed it off as my sleep-deprived brain, as I thought my car to a halt. The chilled brakes coming to a squealing stop made me jump slightly in my seat. I laughed at myself, and I made a pledge to go earlier to bed that night, like I had done so many times before. I stepped out of the car. The chilly January morning hit my body that was still sluggish from my warm bed. My arm and neck hairs stood up as I grabbed my bag and clenched at myself to retain any remaining warmth. The station had an elevated bridge that crossed over both tracks for both coming and going trains. Climbing the stairs, my body reminded me yet again. It was too early for such things. I reached to the top with fatigue, sore calves. I winced with each step crossing the bridge, assuming that I had pulled something. The pain in my leg distracted me for a moment from the fact that all of the lights on the bridge were extinguished. The only illumination came from the eerie clouded moon high above me, and just to my right an unnatural light shining onto me. I joked with myself for a moment that this bridge reminded me of a stage. I was, in fact, the star, with ghostly spotlight illuminating my every move. My humor soon subsided to the same feeling I couldn't shake as I crossed. Felt as if I was being watched from below up on this otherly worldly stage. My silent ghost audience observed from below, and that scared the hell out of me. I quickened my pace and plodded down the stairs to the other side. A feeling of relief just washed over me. I continued up the walkway to the covered waiting area. All the seats were empty, but gradually the same feeling returned that I was still with someone. But I could not decide if I was feeling like I was welcomed or not. While I waited, a dense fog seemed to be crowded over me, closer and closer, blocking out all the surrounding structures that I had seen just so many times. But the strange thing was, if I concentrated hard enough, looking in for an area, I could see it. Just how it looked. An abandoned convenience store once hidden by suffocant fog. Now shone through, I could see it all, just as it was supposed to be. Faded paint, wrapped wood, broken windows, and graffiti. Just as I knew it was, which gave me a suspicion that my mind was merely telling me that there was, and I wanted to believe. The lack of rest was messing about my thinking process, I thought to myself. My mind continued to feel more and more clouded to the point of almost me yelling out in public. But right then, the faint speech of the train tracks snapped me back into reality. I stood up, grabbed my bag. The lights of the front car cut through the haze like knives. But the only lights I could make out were nothing of the car, even though it's just the store I'd seen so many times. Another wave of relief washed over me. Another wave of relief washed over me as I assured that I wasn't insane. My time alone at the station was merely a product of my sleep deprivation. The large body of the train finally cut through the fog and brought itself to a screeching halt in front of me. But I was shocking and frightened to find this was in fact not the passenger train I had frequently take. No, this was much older. More derelict locomotive. I had never seen anything like it. At least not in real life. I had seen trains similar to these in history books, however. It was a passenger train. Not wanting to stay at the station any second, I boarded it. The interior was as I was expected, musty and worn from years of use. As I also expected, there were no passengers on this train this early, and only one conductor from what I saw. He looked like a much older man, but because of his large coat, I could not make out his face. He was heading the opposite direction from my car, so I dismissed the thought of him and sat down. I immediately had a disdain for this car. As I sat down and it took motion, I couldn't explain it. Something was sinister. What made me the most uneasy, I couldn't even make out the sound of the engine on the tracks outside. Yet upon looking out the window, clouds of fog swirled by. We were definitely moving. It was then that I rested my head and eventually fell asleep. It wasn't long before I snapped awake by my mind. No haze of sleep remained. I was completely awake. No fatigue, no energy, nothing at all. I look around, find that my cabin had become increasingly darker. I looked up to see the window of the next car, and was happy to find that the cabin was illuminated. I stood up and walked towards it. For some reason, the thought of grabbing my belongings seemed meaningless as I continued toward the door. With each step, I felt more warmth and pleasure. Noticeably, with each step, grabbing the door handle felt more secure and more safe than I had in years. I pulled open the door. The light inside blinded me. It took several minutes to regain my vision. When I regained my sight, I was shocked to find my family sitting in the car, which had furniture. My grandma used to have this exact same sofa. This was my grandma's house. Memories of childhood enjoyment and happiness floated into my mind. For a moment, then I realized what this was. I had been here before. No, not just my grandma's house. Yes, I had been there. But this moment was playing out before me. I had been here before. Oh God. Felt as if I'd been here, or I could feel it was just happening, or what was going to happen. But I hadn't. This was years ago. First, I wondered why everyone was sitting around what looked like a bed. Mood had changed from sanctuary to very morose. Looked at the faces of my family members, grief-stricken, tired faces blankly away from me. This was the day my grandmother had died. But not just the day and the evening. This wasn't over that soon. I felt the pain, the suffering, the helplessness we all had at those months prior. But I couldn't feel each of my family members' pain as well. Flooding into my mind were thoughts of doubt, anger, and fear, as if someone had captured all the negative feelings and thoughts and gave me a front row seat. The crying, the yelling, the sobbing all echoed in my head. I made the way to the bed they surrounded. There lay my grandmother. I tried to let out a cry, some sort of relief, some expression. Nothing. I was constricted. I could make no noise, no sound, no acknowledgement of anything. I felt as if I would explode. My vision focused on my grandma. Looked as if she had already passed, but instead of peaceful, most would describe death. Instead, to my horror, she withered and turned to dust right before my eyes. The sweet eyes looked down at me as a child, rolled back in her frail head and eroded. Her sweet smile was perverted, and I wrapped into a grisly macabre frown of pain and agony. What could I do? I was helpless. Just as I fell to my knees, I grasped my head. The scene had changed completely. White room was now all white, except for one detail in the corner. Legs and half of my torso hung from the ceiling. The rest above blackened was my vision. Strange, I thought, not grasping what was happening. As soon as I moved closer, I noticed. My memory reminded me. Those looks like your grandpa's old work boots. It hit me all at once. This was a sickening nightmare I had fallen into. I'm screaming now. Unfiltered, and all at once, I screamed the most terrible scream that anyone had befallen my eardrums. The floor gave way, and I plunged into blackness. I woke to a dim light shining in my face. I couldn't move. I looked around and I realized I was in my parents' home. I was confused. The light was off. The house was silent. But I was more relieved the nightmare was finally over. Until the phone rang. Freezing shiver went down my spine as I heard the tone. I hadn't had that. Oh God, no! What's this? Not today. Anything but this. My body sat up on the couch I had been laying on. Only wasn't me moving. I was merely an observer now. I had no control. I could feel everything my body did, but my limbs were locked in their past movements. The moment played out, as it had so many times in my nightmares. I sat up as an empty liquor bottle rolled off my paralyzed body. Hazedly and clumsily, my hands grabbed the phone and held to my ear. "Daniel?" Her voice sent a chill through my body as well as tears from my frozen eyes. "Yeah." Felt the filthy words escape my liquor-coated mouth. "I could use a ride. I missed the bus," she said. "Be right there?" I once disgusted at my past self. This was all too real. "Are you okay, Daniel?" she asked. I hung up and fumbled my way to the door. I fought with everything I had to stop this madness, trying impossibly to move my rigid limbs, holding my breath. Maybe I'd black out. "Don't get in the car." "Fuck! No!" I blackened out as my body sat into the seat and fumbled with the keys, but only for a moment. I snapped back into this nightmare with a loud crack and piercing light. I was almost there. How had I made it so drunk? Why was this happening? I grew closer and closer to the madness every second, when suddenly the car stopped. My head turned to see her. There she was, my beautiful sister Sam. I couldn't control my tears seeing her, the same young, pretty 12-year-old girl waiting in front of the school all those years ago, smiling at me through the haze of this nightmare. Everything went too fast after that. The red light, the truck. Oh God. I can still hear the screams. "Daniel!" Clear as day is my ear. The guilt, Mom leaving, no one to turn to. It's all my fault. And I just kept playing over and over in my head the same scene. Oh God, I deserve it all. I jolt awake from the aging. I felt the seat of train car 66. A cold sweat drenched me as I continued to shiver and convulse. Eventually, I can sit up, shivering and going mad. Suddenly, I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turned my stiffened neck to see the grisly face of the lone conductor I had seen earlier wandering the train. "Ticket, please." A dry but powerful voice echoed from the horrifying jaws of the Grim Reaper. Moving involuntarily, my hands reached in my pockets to pull out a stub of paper etched in blood. I looked to see partial photos of my grandma, my dad, my grandpa, and all the people I know that had died. The photos are partial because punched through them is a symbol of a skull. My possessed hand continued to hold it, and to my horror, clear as day, my picture is right there at the bottom. As my hand outreaches to the cold grasp of death's hand, it occurred to me that I don't quite remember waking up this morning. Death clasps down on my ticket with a device made out of two skeletal hands intertwined together. And all I see is blackness.